Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. The title of today's show is Winning is a Mindset, Not an Offset. That title provided by Rich Kwamza on Twitter. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. Join me for the USA Grand Prix race review. It is one of my favorite race weekends of the year, and I was not disappointed. America does a lot I like. America likes to put on a show, and the Circuit of the Americas has style and substance. It's the best modern racetrack, full stop. But mostly, I want this show just to reflect the joy I felt today watching three current superstars of Formula One battling it out. Some maybe in their prime still, some approaching their prime, and some launching towards stardom. So coming up, we'll discuss how might Hamilton have won that Grand Prix. What demons was Verstappen facing on his brake pedal? Did the sprint race add or take away from the weekend? And we'll ask, who sounded the saddest over team radio, and why was it Leclerc? We are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined in the shed by a kindly American. It's Matt Trumpets. Hey, Matt.
Quiet. I'm braking.
Should I not speak to you in the speaking braking zones? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
You can only speak to me in the waking zones. I saw someone made that joke in our show title attempts. It was a good one.
But it's not like they sorted that out straight away. There was like three separate don't talk to me in the braking zones. By the end of it, I'm pretty sure Lambiase was just waiting on the talk radio. Right, he's coming down the main straight. He's coming down the main straight.
I wouldn't put it past him.
I'll show him to tell me when and when I can't talk. And then as soon as he gets into the braking zone, hey, Max, you having a nice day? You good? You know, family good?
Remember your drink?
Remember your drink. And we are joined in the shed by Essex streamer Scott Tuffey. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Spanners. I think it was an intriguing weekend with some conspiracies floating around. I've got some conspiracies to get off my chest.
That is good.
I think have some validation to them.
Okay, just know that like my job will be to pour cold water on them and be like, Scott, you're going crazy. But just know between you and me, like I'm all in. I am drinking what you're serving up.
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
And to stick on the Essex County borders, we have Antonia Rankin. Hey, Antonia.
Hi, yeah, whilst everything is bigger in America, unfortunately for Ferrari and McLaren, not everything is faster.
No, so Ferrari and McLaren, like we could have predicted, and I did predict before the shows, that this kind of layout and a traditionally highway circuit was never going to suit them. But at least the Ferrari fans got some false hope for a little while. It's easy to forget that Leclerc started this Grand Prix on actual pole position.
Yeah, finishing P6 was probably pretty sobering for the Monegasque driver, wasn't it? And every Ferrari fan watching at home. But I'm sure by now they've learned not to have too much hope.
Poor Ferrari fans, just on the floor rocking. And they go, look, do you remember we talked about it in, was it Singapore, where they had their happy day? I wonder how long that lasted before they now go back to, no, we've gone back to expecting nothing.
I'm pretty sure the sad is back and here to stay.
The sad's back, but not for Missed Apex, as we get on with our race review. Okay, so actually a bunch of strategy in this race. We're going to kick off straight away with could Lewis Hamilton have won this race? But I think the first thing I want to say is, look, when there isn't a straight one stop, when the tyres get to the point where on genuine wear, not like Qatar, but on genuine wear, we have to have more than one stop, F1 delivers classic races. Like, Antonia, are they ever going to get to the point where they just out and out acknowledge that the best Formula One is a two-stop or beyond?
I don't know, because whilst I do agree, I do think we had a fantastic race today, especially towards the latter stages. When we saw mandated pit stops, for example, a couple of weeks ago, it didn't really add much to the race. It made the race very predictable. It meant that nobody really saw proper degradation. So in terms of mandating pit stops, which I've seen a few fans suggest might work, that wouldn't really make things more interesting. And the only step that could be taken aside from that would be Pirelli deliberately making the tyres wear down, even more so than they already do. So yeah, we had a fantastic race today. I think small adjustments could be made perhaps to future races to encourage pit stops. But yeah, the more pit stops, the more strategy, the better.
And that does leave us wide open, Matt, to the thing we find most intriguing, which is teams working their way through a tyre strategy. Obviously, like the drivers have got to do the overtaking and the engineers have got to deliver some race pace. But that tyre strategy in the normal course of a Grand Prix, having troughs and peaks of excitement, the tyre strategy is the thing where you go, right, I'm staring at the live timing. And like this was one of those races, I was watching it a lot in the live timing screen.
Yeah, in the sense that the live timing is just enthralling because you understand the stakes involved. And this, you wish every track it would work out like this. But they brought the correct tires for the race. Not so much, I think, for the sprint, but certainly for the race, they brought the correct tires. The pit delta was around 20 seconds, so it was manageable. And there was just enough performance in it for no one to really know, at least until we watched Carlos Sainz easily blow past poor old Charles Leclerc, whether the one stop or the two stop was going to be the way to go. And even then, just inverting the order of the tires gave us like just a classic nail biter all the way to the last lap.
Okay, but I just want to be clear that them not knowing in the moment which was the best way to go doesn't stop us judging it in hindsight and going, well, they definitely should have done this, that, or the other.
No, judging pants are going on right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was sat there thinking this is actually getting really interesting because it seemed even the teams weren't quite sure what direction they were going to take until they did, other than McLaren, who I think were too reliant on their pre-race planning for those two sets of hard tyres. I think they would have benefited from the medium towards the end of the race, but then again, with a lighter fuel load, that would have complicated things. But I think a lot of the teams were really reliant on data from other drivers to dictate their decisions later on, especially given that there were two pit stops for the majority of the teams.
Yeah.
You know, I think there was a lot of reactive pit stopping, a lot of reactive tyre choices. And yeah, that made things really exciting.
I love that we're already like deep into the weeds because I definitely, when we get to McLaren, I want to argue with you on that tyre choice as well. You know, they were struggling on the hards, but I think definitely hone in on could Lewis Hamilton have won this race, Stuffey? You know, it felt like early on, there was a goal there to be had, but it just seemed to just always be slightly out of grasp.
The short answer is yes, he could have done. Max, the Red Bull wasn't its supreme self that it has been all year. There's a varied reasons for that, probably them stopping development and probably focusing on next year, and obviously this circuit being a lot bumpier than other circuits, and predominantly the Red Bull has struggled at bumpy circuits where they've had to increase the ride height and not run the car as low as possible. With this new ground effect era, obviously the floor has to be run as low as possible, which is why we saw the porpoising effect, and Red Bull was still able to kind of maximize that performance. But yes, there was a number of reasons. Mercedes obviously dilly-dallying with kind of their pit stop, not deciding what they kind of want to go for, a one stop, then a two stop. And then Lewis having to make up so much time, not being able to overtake Charles quick enough, and Norris. And for me, the big one, my first conspiracy of the night, guys.
Okay, let's go for it.
Is Danny Ricciardo conveniently coming out in front of, but behind Max, in front of Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. And this was the lap where Hamilton got past Norris. And as anyone who's paid attention this whole weekend, the dirty air of the cars was tricky. Those who were following, even Max today, struggled in dirty air. In the sprint race, he was clear out in front and he drove away with the win comfortably. But Lewis got caught up by Ricciardo, who has gone onto a set of convenient soft tyres and ran 3 laps on the same pace as Lewis. And if anyone kept an eye on the lap times, Lewis lost out. And I think it was 3 laps or so. And once he cleared Danny Rick, he was like on the back of Max, and he needed one more lap. So first conspiracy of the night is, did Red Bull or did Mr. Helmut Marko call AlphaTauri and say, bring him in now and send him out?
So I have to, hang on, let me put on my corporate voice. I disagree strongly. Just because the junior team, which is an entirely separate entity and makes its own decisions, just because their driver came out behind the lead Red Bull driver and in front of the driver that was catching them up, are inexplicably on a soft tyre that was not good for overall strategy, and that cost Lewis Hamilton enough time to deny him the race win. Just because all of those things are true, how dare you, in fact, how dare you say that AlphaTauri, they can't, AlphaTauri do not deserve that kind of conspiracy from you, Scott. But it does look dodgy.
I smell hypocrisy, Spanners.
Okay, let's go.
My word, there you are every other weekend yapping on about, they're the B team for Red Bull. AlphaTauri are doing everything to benefit Red Bull. How convenient. I'm so surprised you aren't agreeing with Stuffey here. Perhaps
no.
Late night devil's advocate speaking.
Because you know me, the no conspiracies are ever true.
But the thing is, I do see the argument here. Whilst I do agree, it's a bit of a stretch. Yes, it's a conspiracy. I think if there were any substantive evidence to prove this had happened, then there would be big trouble for Red Bull and AlphaTauri. However, you must admit it looks convenient, conveniently coming out on the soft tyre, which did not suit the car, did not perform well. And yes, holding up Lewis Hamilton just enough so as to avoid him the race win.
Yep.
It definitely looks bad.
Okay, I'm going to have to pour cold water on this again, because for this to carry any weight, there would have to be several previous instances of AlphaTauri drivers being deployed to hold up Lewis Hamilton in a competitive situation, and no one can remember a single one. But I do want to focus on, could Lewis Hamilton have won this race? Now, all of this is caveated by the fact we're recording quite soon after the race, and Chris Medland has tweeted, and if Chris Medland hasn't tweeted it, it didn't happen. Breaking news, Hamilton and Leclerc referred to the stewards for issues with the plank in post-race checks. If you fail a post-race technical check, says Chris, it's usually a disqualification. So firstly, I would like to say to the FIA stewards, leave Charles Leclerc alone. He has suffered enough. Yeah, his punishment was baked into the race.
Ferrari strategy.
So what we're going to do, we won't discuss that specific penalty unless we get breaking news during the race that has occurred and he has been penalised.
So just a brief translation of this for those who, because the wording of this is quite confusing. The plank is a board underneath the car made out of wood. If it's worn too thin over the course of a race, that means that the car has been run too close to the ground. The car is hitting the ground and scraping the wood away, basically. And that's how the FIA know that a team has been running the car too low to the ground. This kind of came about more in the new era of F1 since the aerodynamic regulations came in and porpoising was a thing. But I'm kind of surprised to see it at this race. I mean, COTA is a relatively high downforce circuit. So the car, you'd want to run it close to the ground, but you've got one really long straight. I don't know. I wasn't expecting to see it here, especially, I don't know. I think it's an interesting potential penalty to be given, especially given that it's on only one of each team's car, not both, which means they've got different setups. But I think it's definitely an interesting thing to highlight because it suggests that both of those cars were running very close to the ground at a circuit where I wouldn't have called that.
Yeah. And also, just to note that plank is also an affectionate term for a Royal Artillery gunner, although you'd never catch me using that phrase.
It's also an exercise. What I find interesting about this is that it plays into something that Scott mentioned earlier, which is that I think one of Mercedes' biggest advantages at this track is the fact that it was quite bumpy, and that made both Red Bull and Ferrari and McLaren, their nearest rivals, have to run a higher ride height than is really comfortable for them. But Mercedes, because they went with the fabulously flawed zero pod concept at the beginning of the year, I think have been stuck generally not being able to lower the car as much as they'd like at most tracks. But the flip side of that is they have figured out how to optimize the car at higher ride heights. So I think actually the bumps at this track was a big advantage for Mercedes. And I'm quite surprised to hear that they're potentially have infringed on the technical requirements for plank wear, along with Ferrari, that it's only one teammate each time round.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. But for now, let's take the results as classified after the race and talk about whether Lewis Hamilton could have won. So one of the key elements in this battle was the timing of the pit stops. So to set the scene, well, we all watched the race, but to set the scene, Lewis Hamilton was ahead of Verstappen. Verstappen was fighting his way from 6th place. Charles Leclerc, if you remember, did actually start this race on pole, but Lando Norris was in genuine pole position for winning this race. But Matt, it all kind of unraveled a little bit in the first pit stop phase. So they all started on mediums. They all started on mediums.
Yeah, there was a couple of hard
down
starters
there.
in the
chances.
pit lane, which we'll get to later.
Some chances in the pit lane. But Max Verstappen pulls the trigger. Now, the first thing I thought on the when Max Verstappen came in was Hamilton looked way more comfortable on that medium than Lando Norris. So the best case scenario for Mercedes would have been no pit window to drop into, nobody pits, and this first stint gets extended. And in that circumstance, let's say they weren't allowed to pit for some reason, Hamilton was going to he was doing his normal stalk. He was doing his 2019, 2020 stalk where he was holding his distance. And then I think he would have chewed up Norris had they been forced to go longer. But Verstappen, rolled the dice and set off a cascade of pit stops. And I think this is where Mercedes fell down.
Well, I'm going to disagree about halfway with you. To me, this reminds me of, how you had that friend when they were young. No, this isn't about a pub. You had, and they had like just a temper. You could say one thing to them and they'd immediately be yelling at you.
We shouldn't say the name of the people we're thinking about because I want to protect Rob Smith at all costs.
Okay. But then those people get into their 40s and they can go a while before they get angry. But like that, fundamentally, that hair trigger still lives on.
Okay.
Well, in Mercedes, you remember how much trouble they've had warming up the tires at the beginning of the race. To me, I think I still see a hint of that in the character of their car. And so what we have is Lewis Hamilton getting the tires into the right place, pushing hard, coming on, catching Norris with Verstappen behind him. And then Max, surprisingly to me, this was the first hint, I think, that everything wasn't right at Red Bull, tries to undercut to get ahead. And that's not something you'd expect from a car that generally does very well with tires and shows increasing performance the longer into the stint you go. That's not where their bread and butter lies.
Yeah, I would completely agree, especially going back to what you said about tyre wear. This is a really difficult circuit for tyre wear because the load on the rear tyres is so much higher than on the front tyres, which basically means if you push too hard in the first 2/3 of a lap, by the final sector, your rear tyres are gone, you've lost your traction. And that's why we saw so many track limits, so many issues around those final turns on the track. So in theory, Mercedes having struggled with tyre wear and Red Bull having notably not, there should have been more of a performance gulf between them. So I think, in a way, Mercedes probably pulled up to this race and on the radio to Lewis went, yeah, actually, mate, funnily enough, we're doing okay. And I don't think they were expecting that. So yes, a lot of their decisions today were very reactive, but great to see them up there. Whether Lewis could have won the race, I don't think so. Like I said, a circuit like COTA does exaggerate tyre wear differences.
Everyone yell at Antonia now. So I think Scott disagrees.
I think there's a number of reasons other than just strategy that Mercedes could have won this race. I saw a great quote earlier after the race that we're forever talking about the driver and the car in F1, but today really showed how important the team element is and how all of the other, the strategists, the engineers, how important they are to a race win. And in particular today, Mercedes on a number of fronts, as we already said, kind of dilly-dallied a little bit on whether they wanted to commit to a one-stop, go for the suboptimum strategy. And then I'm surprised they tried to do that, because a few years ago, Lewis got stung by sticking to a one-stop strategy and then lost the race win to his own teammate who was on a two-stop. So one-stop's never been preferable at COTA, as Antonia has said, due to the load that is put through the tyres at this circuit. It is quite harsh, especially if you get high temperatures. And then also their pit stops, once again. Mercedes, for years and years now, have just been suffering with their pit stops. They are I can't remember the last time they had a 2.5 second, 2.6 second pit stop. It is always in the mid 3 second range. And it's all hypothetical of like what ifs and buts. But if you look at that over the course of the years, the amount of seconds they've lost over the course of a race, especially when you've got a two-stop race, I think compared to Red Bull and McLaren, at least lost probably 3 seconds, if we're being generous, over the course of this race, which was the potential, would have put him theoretically, in air quotes, ahead of Verstappen. So operationally, Lewis even said it after the race, they need to improve.
See, Rankin, this is where you're going to struggle if you say that Mercedes couldn't have won this race. I think Scott's going to keep coming back with small factors, and I think it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it, from Scott? Can I just say for our dear listeners who can't see the screen at the moment, not only is Scott sat there in a Mercedes
is dying
shirt,
of death right now. Oh my God.
Mercedes shirt,
he also has a Lewis Hamilton poster and a mini replica helmet. So as the non-partisan member, because Spanners doesn't get a say
Listen,
here.
I was trying to give off positive energy today, okay? I really wanted Lewis to do well, and I thought, why not put on the team colours?
Well, whilst you were burning your candles and doing your rituals, he unfortunately came P2. I hate to break it to you.
Thanks for reminding me.
Wow, that was a murder, Rankin.
All
Murder.
I'm saying is there might be some bias, dear listeners, on this podcast.
That's fair. And we don't mind that. We are not adverse to bias. I tend to say to people, like, admit your bias. And Scott is quietly sitting there with a Lewis Hamilton poster, mini helmet and top. Matt.
I've now remembered exactly why I'm terrified of Antonia, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I want to bring it back to the first stop. So
Yes, key.
I also want to point out that what we're talking about here isn't quite whether or not Lewis could have won. The question is whether or not, under the right circumstances, Lewis would have been within, let's say, DRS of Max.
And had to go.
By the final lap. Because I think that's really what it is. Whether or not he could have won is an entirely separate, unwinnable discussion that you don't ever want to have on Twitter. Just trust me on this. But whether or not he could have caught Max and been fighting for the win, that's what we really want to talk about here. And I want to start with the magic lap. And to me, I don't think the answer was to have tried to undercut Norris, which would have pitted him the same lap as Max. That means Max would have been behind him, but Max would have been behind him on a medium tire. He would have been on a hard tire. And we saw Max eventually catch Lando and pass him with that medium tire. The same would have happened to Lewis, I do believe. However, the real issue here is I went through and I looked at the stint lengths of anyone who put on the hard tire. The longest stint was 21 laps, and that was done by Logan Sargent. So I'm just not going to take that as an entire bellwether here. And I'm going to say that he could have pitted earlier than he did, specifically lap 18. His hard tire would have gone 19 laps. He could have still put on the medium. And he was 22 and change ahead of Max, which means he would have come out either right with Max or slightly in front of him.
So this is the key. Sorry, Matt. Yeah. This is the key that you've touched on. The key thing that's been bothering me is that Hamilton had lots of tyre left at the end of the race, and that critical period where they kept him out. And on the radio, they asked both drivers. They said, "Right, Lewis, do you think you can do another 5 laps?" And he's like, "No, it seems a bit sketch." And they asked Russell, and Russell was like, "Yeah, no problem." But Russell was going around quite a bit slower than Hamilton.
I saw you. Hamilton used his tires harder at the beginning. And honestly, when it comes to tire wear, I don't think Russell is necessarily always the best judge.
No, so like they seem to initially listen to Russell and then went, oh no. They look at the lap times. If you were watching the lap times, and you should be, the best way to enjoy an F1 race is to look at the F1 provided lap times. I think it's like $2 a month to subscribe to that in the UK. It is definitely worth it. It increases the value. You could see as they were having this argument, Hamilton's lap times go out and out. And you go, right. And they obviously Mercedes saw that and went, oh, we've made the wrong shout here. We need to dial it back and get him in. But again, then they would just cut. They were stuck between two strategies, Matt. And this is the key thing as well. I think Mercedes were going for a one-stop, got confidence from Russell going, it's completely fine, and then realised they were wrong and got stuck in no man's land.
I think they were really playing for the medium in the last stint, especially because they knew Max had put on the medium and they had a really good idea of when he was going to have to pit, when that performance was going to start to drop off for him. In fact, they probably thought he was going to go a bit longer, which might have been what ultimately influenced their thinking to keep Lewis out later. They thought Max would be able to extend that second stint, not realizing he had other issues he was coping with that was not going to make that work the way Red Bull wanted. But looking at the actual numbers from the race, he could have gone to lap 18, pitted, and theoretically been out about a half a second to a second ahead of Max. And that was the situation that potentially wins him the race. The first of, because as Scott mentioned earlier, there's about 5 or 6 things we're going to wind up running into that all cost him time in this race that kept him from catching Max. But yeah, that was the first and I think the biggest.
Yeah, lots to unpick in that. Going back to lap 18, Verstappen pitted lap 16, so there was room for Mercedes to be reactive there whilst still staying relatively close. At that point, I don't know what they were thinking with strategy, as in where their heads were at, because like I said, I don't think they'd clocked that they could potentially win the race until a good chunk into it.
Apparently, Bruce says Toto said they were going for a one-stop, but stint 1 made them decide no.
Well, there you go. Part 2. For the final laps, when it comes down to tyres, it didn't matter whether one of them had 2 laps more, 3 laps more. It wouldn't have come down to that. If the race had 2 more laps and Verstappen and Hamilton were where they were, but just 2 more laps on the race, I still don't think Lewis could have taken Verstappen, because going back to the physics and the genealogy of the track, he would have pushed so hard in the first couple of sectors, knowing that he only had 1 lap or 2 laps to do it, knowing that sector 1 and turn 1 is an excellent place to take. He would have pushed so hard in the first sector of the lap that his rear tyres would have lost all of their traction, all of their responsivity by the final turns, and he wouldn't have been able to catch and overtake him by the end of the lap. So for those reasons, I do not think in those circumstances, with those tyres in that race, he could have won.
And I think this butts up right against what Scott has been saying. So I'll give the floor to Stuffey.
I'm just saying the laws of physics don't apply when Max and Lewis go wheel to wheel. Do you remember 2021 or Brazil last year? I genuinely think I just think with Max struggling with his brakes, and you could tell he was getting a bit anxious on the radio, a little bit nervous on the radio, and getting even more shorter with his engineer than he normally does. He knew Lewis was chasing him down. He knew, and he was probably wishing for that checkered flag. And that we don't know if it was going to be the case, but I think Lewis definitely had a bit of a tyre advantage there at the end, and I think he would have forced Max into some skullduggery. We already saw Max, which I'm sure we'll get onto at some point, sent it up the inside of Charles Leclerc. And new racing rules, whether you agree with them or not, I definitely don't agree with them. We would have seen something of the like in regards to Max defending against Lewis. But yeah, I still think there's so many different scenarios where Lewis could have won this race.
And let's get Antonia in, and then Matt, I know you've got a deeper point there. And then we'll move on from Mercedes.
I will say, though, Lewis does deserve full credit, and it's something he's always been exceptional at, and one thing that does set him apart from other drivers. Lewis is fantastic at biding his time, waiting close by, keeping the pressure on, and waiting for the other driver to make an error. And that's why we saw Verstappen sweating. That's why we saw him getting agitated on the radio, because he knew that for the final good few laps of the race, that Hamilton was there waiting, ready to pounce. And it's something that Lewis has always been fantastic at. And he played really well today. Unfortunately, it just didn't work in his favour.
Yeah, it didn't work by those 2 laps. They kept him out too long, I think. It didn't work because Norris decided he thought he could hold Lewis off for second place when that was never going to happen. It didn't work because of Ricciardo, as we've already discussed. It didn't work for a lot of reasons. It didn't work because Mercedes pit stops are just that much slower than Red Bull's. But fundamentally, and I know I said this is an argument you should never have on Twitter, but guess where I'm not right now? Twitter, yeah, leave Twitter. Fundamentally, Max had brake issues. And I would argue that if Lewis Hamilton had DRS on Verstappen on the last lap into turn 12, there is no way Max can outbrake him and defend in his normal manner. And I think had Mercedes got him that close, I think it's a victory for the Silver Arrows here.
I'm not sure. So look, this is the crossover now between the Hamilton topic and then going to Max Verstappen, because Max Verstappen had work to do. So he had to get out from 6th place. He had decisive moves to make, and Hamilton also had those same battles. So, like, I think, Scott, like, as much as you want your conspiracy theories or whatever, like, look at the time Hamilton lost behind Norris.
Yeah.
Verstappen didn't lose that time behind Norris. Again, behind Leclerc, I think Hamilton lost like a good half a lap. So I think you can account for nearly a 3-second difference getting through that traffic. So that's not a mad conspiracy theory. And I worry that, like, Hamilton's really down on himself, going, yeah, I made a big mistake last week. I let everyone down. And there's just this edge where Lewis Hamilton has to apologise for shoving people off track and making it his silver arrow a missile. Verstappen does not feel that at all. But that was a factor. Verstappen cut through the traffic and cut through the pack better than Lewis Hamilton today.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you can agree with that. He made some great moves on the brakes down into turn 12, I think it was, from quite far back. Can't deny that. Most of them were clean. The one where he forced the issue was on Leclerc, because he got stuck behind Leclerc for quite a considerable amount of laps early on in the race. And he came from so far back and goes to this old racing rule, new racing rule, sorry, not old racing rule, because technically, if you have a wheel, Brad's spoken about it plenty of times on this podcast, about how if you get your rear wheels alongside the car's rear axle, then you're entitled to that space. But I thought the rules had changed slightly this year, where they're supposed to be the car's width, and it got investigated. Well, it got investigated by the stewards, and they said there was no penalty to be gained. Maybe because Leclerc kept his foot in it, and because of the off-track nature. But I still believe that showed his necessity and frustration to get past the Ferrari, and should have given that position back. So that's also a swings and roundabouts there that could have thrown it into Lewis's direction. But yeah, I don't think you can argue that Lewis he doesn't go for that gung-ho attitude anymore. He's more smart about his overtaking. Like with Lando today, he could have gone for that move when Lando
blocked him in turn 1.
Jinx too late into the corner, but he lifted off. He was like, no, I'll just do the cut back because I've got the better tyres and grip. Whereas if he was a bit younger, he might have taken the slipstream and tried to slip it up the inside. Okay, so let's address that overtaking move on Lando Norris first. I think that was so I was going to criticise you when you said, he doesn't go for the gung-ho attitude. I do feel that he's restricting himself. So there's a psychological thing there where he goes, if I crash, that's more of a big deal and I failed. Whereas Verstappen isn't restricted by that. And ultimately, that will cost Lewis Hamilton from here on in to the rest of his career, because he's a quote-unquote role model, isn't he? And I think he's aware of that. He doesn't want to go skittling everyone. And when he makes a mistake, he goes, oh no, it was my bad, I'm so sorry. Verstappen doesn't say that if he causes an accident. He goes, that's what you get if you don't leave the space, and walks across the racetrack. And that will limit Hamilton. But that move on Lando Norris was absolutely sublime. Watch it back in Sector 3,
through the Istanbul rip-off section, Hamilton had a run on Lando Norris, but not enough of a tyre delta to hang it around the outside. I think Lewis Hamilton knew there was no way he was getting around the outside, yet he kept his nose in there to make Lando Norris defensive, to ensure that he had DRS again up to turn 1. And that was so smart that I assumed he was going to get past him on turn 1. I started typing it in the notes and I looked up and I went, oh my goodness, I just in time to see Lando Norris cut very late and really defend very, very hard against Lewis Hamilton up the inside. By the way, we didn't see that when he was defending against Verstappen. Maybe he doesn't want to ruin their next Bezzy barbecue or golf round or paddle ball or whatever they do. Very, very late, very hard defense. And then Hamilton, very smart, does a brilliant cutback. So as critical as I've been of Lewis Hamilton wheel to wheel, that was incredible. But I did want to point out one thing, Scott, which is that whilst Max did struggle against Leclerc for longer, Verstappen didn't have the same tyre delta that Lewis Hamilton then had later in the race. So it was a bit of an easier overtake for Hamilton against an ailing Leclerc. Matt?
Well, I want to get back to the brakes thing, if I can. Because, yes, you were right. Max used his brakes the entire race, and they still worked at the end.
Yes.
But specifically, the point that I want to make is his last pit stop. Did you see how he rolled into his pit box? He did not come in there full speed and stomp on the brake pedal at the very last moment. He rolled into it like grandma into the supermarket parking lot. Or grandpa. To be fair. Because he knew he couldn't trust the brakes. The brakes weren't working the way he expected them to. And it was costing him. And the later in the race it got, the worse it got for him. So to drag it back to the argument of, I think Lewis had the advantage on the brakes. If he'd gotten within DRS in the last lap or two, I don't think Max had the car to defend the way he normally would. And I think Max was pretty aware of it too. So
Stop
that's
talking to me in the braking zone.
That's exactly why I think had Mercedes been able to get him there, he would have been able to make that work. That said, I'm not really going to ding Mercedes here. Yeah, 1 stop, 2 stop, whatever. They were about two laps late. They gave him an extremely good strategy that, were it not for about 5 other things, would have gotten him to Max before the end of the race and given him a chance to pass with better tires.
Yeah.
So it's like the difference between perfect and very, very good. We're splitting hairs here.
Okay, so had Red Bull been any worse and had Verstappen been any worse, they wouldn't have won the race today. So it's nice to kind of see them being tested. So like Matt, like you'll remember 2018, 2019 was some of the best performances of Red Bull. And actually they had such a big effect on the race with their very forward-thinking strategy. So this was like a Red Bull of old. You know, they would roll the dice. They would force the front teams to go, oh, well, we had this steady plan, but now Red Bull have like pitted 3 laps earlier. What are they doing? What are they up to? And so it's almost been a shame this season with Verstappen's dominance and Red Bull's dominance that we haven't seen them be able to stretch their legs, because when they need to, they are very aggressive on strategy. They are perfect on the pit stops. I don't think the Verstappen long pit stop was the pit crew's fault, but the strategy was there. They have vision as a race team. And it was just nice to see them today. They had to win it.
They did. And it took everything they had from the driver and from the team to make that happen. And honestly, just the rub of the green, a little bit of luck when it came to Norris thinking he might hold off Hamilton. That alone was the 2 seconds you're looking for.
Okay, but a lot of times we say, okay, there's a number of drivers who could have, won this championship, but Antonia, like, there's not every driver would have won from Max's position today.
Yeah, I don't think Max's own teammate would have podiumed from his position today, to be quite frank.
To be fair, I did say anyone in that car.
Well,
Not the nerfed number 11.
Here we go.
well, the thing is, I've tried to come up with every possible explanation for Perez's shocking and embarrassing performances, both in quali and races and sprints. But from confidence to trying to run a setup that matches Max's that doesn't suit him, I don't think anything can excuse how bleh he is at the moment. There's no... I've talked about this a few times. There is a difference between a good driver and a great driver, and it's intelligent driving. You can be a great defender, you can be a really, really good at on the straights or something. But if you aren't driving intelligently and with a certain flair that you only see the greats having, you're not there. And the thing is, Perez isn't even nearly there at the moment. He's having small errors that are ruining his races. He's making small, consistent errors that are completely screwing him in qualifying. He's getting track limits where Max isn't even coming close. Everything is just not clicking with Perez. And like I said, I don't know if it's because he's lost his confidence, whether he's trying to run a setup that doesn't suit him because he's so desperate to be treated the same as Max is. It's shocking. And I frankly think his performance today was really, P5, where was he? How many times in the race did we actually talk about him? How many times in the championship have we even spoken about him other than to say, gosh, Max is making him look bad?
All right, so my strategy of trying to be really positive about Max so that no one would talk about Perez, that didn't work, did it, Stuffey?
No, quite not. That didn't stop Antonia from going in, but I totally agree with everything that she said.
Two-footed tackle.
It was everything that she said and all of the below. It's a combination of everything. Look, he was actually matching Max in pace at the start of the season. I think we've spoken about it a number of times on here before. And look, quite evidently, they have two very different driving styles. It's been quite well documented. And it's been quite well documented how Max likes his car, more pointy. Sergio is more understeery. He likes to deal with that. Max hates that. Look, Max is the quicker driver. If he can unlock that potential from his driving style, it makes sense for a team to focus and direct their development to one particular driver. Perez, unfortunately, he is a good driver, but he's not as good as Max. And that's the difference. He is just lacking in confidence and then driving a car that he just can't deal with. But to touch on Red Bull, it's interesting. I feel like they're dangling a little carrot in front of the rest of the grid at the moment because they've quite clearly stopped bringing upgrades to this car.
They have, yeah.
They are focusing on next year, and it's like let's spend the rest of the season testing our chops. Let's give them a little bit of hope and. While they bring their brand new fancy upgrades, and let's test our pits and keep us on edge and keep us like performing at a high level and test our chops so that we're ready to roll again next year.
Okay, so looking at the panel, Antonia is desperate to get in with more Perez slander. So Matt, what have you got?
Well, I'm surprised at this actually. There is little defense for Perez in his recent races. He has been...
God, that's not better.
I'm going to use the word abysmal.
Oh, Matt.
And that's polite. I'm being polite here.
Okay, but we've covered that.
I'm being polite.
We've covered it. It's covered.
But despite his abysmal performance recently, I'm going to say P5, he had Russell ahead of him. He had Leclerc ahead of him. He finishes ahead of them both. I think P5 is where Red Bull need him to finish for a Constructors' Championship point of view relative to Max winning. And look, if you look at how he drove in Qatar and you look at how he drove now, don't get me wrong, I think he's capable of better.
All right.
But he has got the thing back on track. He passed championship rivals. He got important points. Well, they're not important points for the team. The team's already won the Constructors' Championship. Who am I kidding? But for himself, he limited damage that needed to be limited.
All right.
And he made positive forward progress. And most importantly, he got no penalties for nothing. He didn't hit anybody.
All right, Matt.
Well
he didn't
done.
Drive off the track 72 times. And like, you're going to laugh at me and try and minimize this, but when you're in the mental place that he was in, and I say this as a performer, and I say this as a former competitive athlete, when you're in the mental place that he is in, and you come around to this, you got to look at that as a big step forward.
Amazing. Right, very quickly on this. Antonia, then Scott, very quickly.
Oh, baby Perez, you've done so good. You didn't crash today. You didn't come.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. Scott, no, move on.
He's trying so hard, and he's in such a difficult mental space. Is he, or is he one of the most competitive drivers on the planet and should be doing better in the most dominant car of all time? I won't have it. He is in one of the most fantastic F1 cars ever engineered by the biggest engineering genius to ever live, Adrian Newey, and he's putting it in P5, and we're patting him on the back. I could do better. It's shocking.
Antonia, the last time I saw you in a motorsport vehicle, you fell out of it and lay on the ground unconscious for several minutes. Scott.
And I was still faster.
I will just say, Danny Rick earned himself a bonus point today by holding up Lewis and Lando. So Perez may be out by the end of the season if Danny keeps doing what Red Bull want him to.
All right, let's move on. All right, I'm not going to lie. That was emotional. I think I've put up with a lot there, and I would like to thank my panel for never holding back. But I would like to be a bit more positive because I think I have been too quick. I don't know why I want to dismiss Lando Norris. I don't know what it is. I let my fan feelings come to the forefront, and I am very clear that what I want to happen might influence my analysis of what I think happened. So I keep looking for chinks in the armor of Lando Norris. So I don't know why. He's funny, he's personable, but there's something about Lando Norris that makes me not a fan of him. So I'll be open with that. I'm not a fan of Lando Norris. So when Piastri was getting his good results and getting his sprint race win and doing well in qualifying, I was very keen to go, hey, this is Piastri doing well. But also, oh, look, it's kind of showing up the driver that I'm not a fan of. The key thing that has made Piastri look good is that he is good. He's undeniably good. That's fine. But performance on tyre wear and challenges when you have to maintain that tyre wear over a Grand Prix distance is the main differentiator right now between Piastri and Lando Norris. I don't think that is controversial. This kind of Grand Prix, this kind of tyre strategy, this kind of race is at the heart of what the turbo hybrid era, the Pirelli era, has been about. And in this era of Formula One, Lando Norris is showing that he has all the skills to be a potential future great and a potential future baddie for me, because I don't mind if the people I don't like are good. They can be the Death Star, they can be the bad guy, that's fine. But Lando Norris is showing that if McLaren are in the battle for the driver's title at any point in the next couple of years, he can be there to lead McLaren. And I think he's showed that today. So who are the big Norris fans or stans in the crowd? So we've got Rankin, Antonia Rankin, Antonia J Rankin on Twitter. We should do the promos in mid-show. Okay. Mix the broccoli in with the stew. On TikTok, you're Antonia F1?
Nope. F1 Antonia.
F1 Antonia. If you search Antonia Rankin F1, you will find Antonia on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Twitter, and we'll put all those links in the show notes below. Those people who have been following Lando Norris passionately and believing in him, I think they're getting rewarded right now.
Yeah, Lando's a driver that I've been very excited about seeing his development, especially over the last few seasons. I think he has huge potential. He's a great driver. He really is. He's got such good racecraft. He's almost always, I think, engaged in very clean, good battles. You know, he doesn't have the Schumacherisms that perhaps we saw in an early Max, but I think he's really, really got world champion in him. So I think he's great, to be honest, Lando. And yes, he's personable. He's great for the sport. He's a fantastic figure to have. But yeah, no, big fan of Lando. Really excited to see if McLaren do come back up, which I hope they do, given their heritage in F1, I think he'll be winning races left, right, and centre.
And Stuffey, Norris today, obviously the qualifying performance was good, but he also picked his battles and defended well. So annoyingly, as a Hamilton fan, he was like, no, I'm not in a race with... I think they identified fairly early on. They went, no, we're not going to hold Max, but we might just hold Hamilton. But when you see his defensive style, his wheel-to-wheel style, I think a lot of that is down to, sim racing. You and I, are big into the sim racing community. It gives you a lot of options to try, racing maneuvers. And Lando Norris doesn't mind racing the likes of you and me on iRacing and jumping on and going, all right, I'll see what Scott does. I'll see what happens when Scott sends it up the inside at Kota.
I can say that I've shared a track with Lando in the virtual world, but I haven't raced him, no, because he's just way too quick for my
I've got similar. So I think I've been on track in iRacing with Fernando Alonso, like bunch of GT drivers, Romain Grosjean, and my big thing was that Romain Grosjean nearly lapped me, but I managed to hold him off. So by the end of the race at Interlagos, it was like, that's actual Romain Grosjean behind me on a sim. But these drivers that go on there, that go on the sim, genuinely see it as a way to develop their racecraft. And I'm not sure you'd have seen many people on the F1 grid now defending into turn one quite in the way that Norris did.
Yeah, I mean, he's aggressive. He wants that first win. But obviously, Piastri's beat him to it. Another sim racer who I've crashed into actually on sim racing. So that's my claim to fame. I can say I've crashed into an F1 race winner. But he's got the raw pace. He's quite evidently showing his experience that he's gained over the years compared to Piastri, obviously with his tyre management, specifically in Suzuka. Today as well, I'm sure we'll touch on it in a second. Piastri was very unfortunate with his contact with Ocon. Not really too much that either of them could do. It was just so light, but unfortunately it gave him an engine issue, which he had to retire early. Which after a poor qualifying for Piastri, he obviously made a hell of a start, showing his talent as well. But yeah, Norris was doing really well, and I don't know if McLaren maybe gave up on that win too early. They pitted Lando first, expecting to undercut Max, who seemed like he wasn't dropping in pace on the medium tyre. And I just didn't see him going on to another set of another set of hards that he had available, making up that much time with the undercut, even though the undercut was strong, on Max, who still had pretty relatively good pace on the mediums. So I feel like McLaren kind of accepted their fate a little bit too early, considering how much Lando truly wants that win. Like, I imagine he would be disappointed if that's genuinely the case as well. Because I was a bit baffled by that, to be honest with you, because he came out behind Max as well, and as soon as he came out behind Max, he was never going to catch him, and it was all about defending from Lewis. But yeah, no, I'm sure that first win is going to come. He was quoted in an interview afterwards saying he still doesn't expect it by the end of the year, even though they're doing really well. But I suppose that's playing down your chances, and if something happens, happy days.
The secret to happiness, Matt, is low expectations, and I say that as a married father of two.
Yeah, I think the problem here, I think everybody got to turn one and was like, it's McLaren's day. They are going to win this. And the fight with Max was good.
Not everyone. See, right, this is it. Like, I got a bit of slack in our Slack group, in our Patreon Slack group. If you want to see that, patreon.com/Missed Apex, if you want to support us. Highest Patreon supported podcast in F1, thanks to you guys. But there's so many McLaren fans in our Slack group. It's the vast majority seem to be McLaren fans. And when I suggested after qualifying that they would be ultimately doomed on race pace, people got quite upset at me, saying, why are you throwing cold water on McLaren's chances? It is just because when tyre wear is a factor, McLaren have struggled. I don't think that's slander. That's just the way their car is this season. And when you've had Qatar that covered that up, or races that are solid one-stops and they only really stop once because you have to, that's been a bit covered up. But in this kind of race, it's exposed.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dang it, you just took my point
sorry.
there.
Well, I've got to sometimes
Which was
say the smart
most
thing.
literally, if you looked at the lap times, you could see throughout the course of the race, McLaren losing out to Mercedes because as good as they have made that car, in the specific circumstances of the ride height window they needed to get around the track with the bumps, they don't have the management of the tires that Mercedes has.
Why?
And it's
Tell me this. Is it a case of you get a car that can do one good lap in qualifying and then you work on the race pace later? Or is it something inherent that means you have a car that happens to be better at qualifying than race pace?
Well, all cars have, like, we talk about the tires having windows where they perform optimally. And cars will have a similar thing, especially in this ground effect era. With the ride height settings, there'll be a set of ride heights where that car is optimal. And I think McLaren is in that window. They were like Silverstone, for example. They are very, very competitive. But as you move them out of that window, they begin to suffer from balance issues, from inconsistent downforce that takes a bigger toll on the tires. The tires heat up and then it takes laps to cool them down. If we think back to the sprint, which I can barely remember because it was like just ungodly boring. But if we think back to the sprint and we look at what happened to Piastri, he essentially, my understanding of it was, he essentially just lit up his rear tires. And by time they cooled back down, he had fallen almost entirely out of the points. And Sainz with the softs, the same thing. Once those tires overheat, you really have to be gentle with them till the temperature goes out of them. And while you're busy doing that, you're losing seconds a lap to all of your rivals. And McLaren, as good as their car isn't great at the higher ride heights that are needed at this track. And I would say the same is true of Red Bull. Red Bull were at a complete disadvantage. And this goes back to the thing with Mercedes having been stuck with higher ride heights, I'll say that correctly now, throughout the season, is optimized for this track. So we see it play out in the margins here, but that's why Hamilton caught and passed Norris. And the difference from McLaren to Red Bull is why he couldn't quite catch Max, along with all the other stuff we already said.
Yeah, so just to touch on that about tyres and why they are the way that they are, I read a really interesting analogy on
reading.
All right, well, I'll explain it.
Thank
so that
you.
none of you guys have to read. You're so welcome. Basically, the elastomers in tyres that make them stretchy and responsive are in formations like meatballs, basically. And as they heat up and they have loads put on them, these meatballs stretch out into spaghetti. But if the tyre gets too hot, the shape, like
okay.
Imagine the little particles.
This is going the way of Matt's pub analogy, but I'll allow it.
Okay. Meatball particles. Optimum temperature, good temperature, stretch into spaghetti, go back into meatballs. Too hot, stretch into spaghetti, stay in spaghetti. Tyre not responsive. This bad. Tyre optimum temperature, come back into meatball. Brilliant. And the reason this is an issue in COTA is because this happens to the rear tyres and not the front tyres.
I'm hungry is all I know. As I'm hungry right now. I have completely lost my train of thought. I hope that made sense to everyone watching and listening. So I have got a plan to delay talking about Ferrari because that's what's coming up next. I think quite a good topic is, and I'm wary of the time and I'm wary of Scott and Antonia falling asleep. I will fall asleep, but I'm not allowed to go upstairs today. Nick just dumped a pillow and a duvet, and I'm actually sleeping in the studio tonight. Which is like, do not come in here at 2 a.m. and wake me up. So that's what I'm dealing with. But I have got two topics, which is the sprint weekend. Did it add or take away from the overall event, and turn one? And then we can focus on the misery of Ferrari. Okay, turn one, Scott, Stuffey, Tuffey. I will say that you have got you're the owner of my favorite sim racing stream, simply because I don't know how you keep your calm. And the fact is, like, someone will, like, wipe you out and you'll go, oh, no, a bad thing happened. That was bad. Oh, well, let's go to the next race now. And then when you do lose it, or because your cat has turned off your PC, or you're finally, like, fed up, like, I see that inner anger seething through like a volcano, yet somehow you stay calm. And that's the reason you're a good sim racing streamer, and I could never do it.
Yeah, I do try. I was doing a league race the other day, and my wheel failed on me. Mechanical failure. And I get frustrated at myself more than anyone else through years of playing golf and breaking many golf clubs. So I try and hold back my anger as much as I can.
So I'm a frustrated golfer as well. The similarity between golf and sim racing is you get so angry and you have to remind yourself, I spend all my time doing this and spend so much money, and yes. and I'm only this good. what a miserable human I am that I've spent all this time and money and I'm no better than this. But go and check out Scott's streams. We'll have links in the show notes below, and you should also follow him for his hot takes on social media as well. Turn 1. I'm going to you for this as our racer on the panel. But turn 1 is one of the most interesting, turns. We had the incident with Verstappen and Leclerc that you referred to earlier. We had Lewis Hamilton on the outside on the sprint race. Why wasn't he penalised for going off track and keeping that position? We had Verstappen and Russell both maintaining their positions off track today as well. So A, why did that happen? Why were they not punished? And B, the most fascinating thing about that corner is you essentially have cars converging at right angles. You have one car sweeping around the outside and another car just beelining it to the apex and narrow. I don't think there's a better turn 1 for racing in Formula 1.
Yeah, turn 1's great. It's such a unique corner that I don't think there's anything quite like it that I can think of. Any of the tracks that I've raced online or that I can think of that F1 goes to. It's almost like if you look at it from kind of a bird's eye view, it's almost like a tick, like a small tick, the way that the hairpin works in an essence. So there's so many different lines of attack. You can go really wide and try to cut back. I mean, one of the most satisfying moves to pull off as a sim racer or to even watch on TV is the cutback. When someone just allows that guy to outbrake themselves and then you just go straight back on the inside with the grip and just go, thank you, see you later. And it always provides a bit of drama at the first lap as well. We didn't see that today, but we've seen that over the years where people have taken the tighter line. And then, of course, because people are coming in from a wider line, they then catch a wheel on the front wing and there's incidents. But yeah, it's such a great corner for racing.
Okay, but what Italian dish would you most compare that to? More like a tagliatelle, a panini, carbonara,
a lasagna.
Yeah,
so many layers to it.
Yeah, it's like a lasagna. Antonia, turn 1.
I have to say, I would compare it to La Source at Spa-Francorchamps. Similar kind of thing where you're cutting back on yourself a fair amount. Obviously, it's different because at COTA there's the chicane, whereas at Spa you've got to get a good send out of La Source in order to get up Eau Rouge Radion well. But no, it's a great circuit, and like you said, one of the better modern circuits, especially that feels like it has some character and feeling of racing about it that a lot of the more recent tracks don't seem to have. But no, I always enjoy the race at COTA. I think it's a really nice one to have on the calendar, and it brings some really unique challenges for the cars, for the drivers, but it is gorgeously wide, I will say. Turn 1, it allows for so much space, and you see drivers, I think the television angles are a bit deceiving, but you see drivers look like they're going really quite deep into turn 1, only to cut back in, do a late apex on it, or an early apex, sorry, on the turn, and getting a really good send. And I think there's a lot of really good ways you can take that as a driver to still get a good exit, which keeps things exciting. But
there's a few corners like that as well, Stuffey, isn't there? So like there's a few places where you can give a little bit and then You know, if only they didn't have this rule where you can now shove people off track. It would be, if you had to give any car that was alongside you racing room, we could have seen fights go on for multiple corners, like we had Tsunoda and one of the Haases in the sprint race. They were side by side for half a lap because neither of them, for whatever reason, they chose not to shove each other off track. The second you can shove someone off track, that's the end of the battle.
Well, yes, there's certain drivers who we know on that grid who respect racing room and those who don't. And the ones that do respect racing room, we see what, as we racing fans, want to see, which is battles lasting for multiple corners. That Tsunoda one, I recommend anyone who hasn't seen it yet from the sprint race. It wasn't shown on TV. If you go on Twitter, searching Tsunoda Magnussen, they went for half a lap. It was brilliant. Pure racing. That's what we want to see. And this circuit provides that. And I think, as Antonia alluded to, the wideness of the track and the nature of it, where it has different corners, it has high speed, fast corners, which put more load on the front tires. Then it also has the slower sections as well, which puts more load on the rear tires. So there's a balancing act that has to be played here. And I think it's no surprise that we see the circuits like Silverstone, like Circuit of the Americas, which have those different style of corners, a mixture of those corners, but are also high speed, that we see some of the best races because strategy comes in. The wideness of the circuit allows these big wide cars to go side by side compared to some of the smaller circuits we go to. And yeah, it's just it's a great circuit all round. More of this, please.
All right. Even though it's 1 a.m. here in the UK, I have several things I want to yell about. So we do have to get to Ferrari, unfortunately. So it will be the awards, as usual, that we'll end on. And then before that, we'll have Ferrari. But I do want to talk about the sprint weekend. So this does feel like the Emperor finally standing there butt naked and everyone going, hey, I can see his ghibli bits. So, and I think that was because Max Verstappen, in an interview, said, look, this ruins the surprise of Sunday. This basically gives you a preview of the show. Basically, Verstappen pointed out, you know, a lot of the stuff, Matt, you and I were complaining about when the sprint weekend first started, which is it's an undercooked version of a Grand Prix. You can't just have a mini version of a Grand Prix and stop it a third of the way through. You have to do something distinctly different. And it's not. The sprint weekend was saved in Qatar because half the grid was on a different tyre strategy, or was that the sprint race before it? I've lost track. So unless you have something bizarre happen, the sprint races are always dull. You have one or two laps of action, and then it settles down into nothingness, or you have a safety car early on, which chews up 5 laps, and then there's no opportunity for anything to happen. And in the spirit of Antonia and her analogy, I would compare this to a third cooked rice. So F1 is asking us on a sprint weekend to have 3-minute boiled rice.
Who would cook rice 3 times? That is just monstrous. Go. Get into the seat immediately. No, I think the issue with sprint races is, as much as you might personally dislike them, or I might personally dislike them, I think it was fair to explore the potential of them.
Okay, agree.
I think there may be a way ultimately to incorporate something like that into a Formula One weekend that would be interesting for people, either with historic drivers or junior drivers. I don't know. It's not a problem I want to solve right now. But I'm going to argue with you. The real problem with sprint races is they don't sell more tickets for the circuits. And I think that was one of the big reasons they were being explored in the first place, is the idea if we had racing every single day on a Friday, on a Saturday, on a Sunday, we'd see more people at the circuit and we'd get more engagement at the circuit, which after all is paying what I would like to call a not insignificant fee for Formula One to come race there. But from what we heard over the weekend from the chairman of the Circuit of the Americas, that's not the case. Sprint races are doing absolutely bupkis for ticket sales. And that might be something that causes Formula One to seriously reconsider having them, because they're more expensive for the teams. I think generally the drivers don't enjoy them as much. And the theoretical concept here that light cars on different tires would lead to interesting racing isn't really working out often enough to make it worth the effort.
I actually completely agree. Like,
Boring. No, that's not what we do here. Go on.
all right, boys.
Yeah.
I know it's late. Let's calm down. I think I agree with what Verstappen said. I think it gives us an unnecessary preview into what's going to happen, and
Yes,
it takes
it
the dull
does.
off of the race a little bit. But also, they're too short. But then sometimes they're too long. They're a
So
really
should we
awkward length.
Have
these
two
sprint
races, just 2 full-length races.
Well, because we're watching it and we're thinking, oh, if there were only a couple of more laps, because his tyres are about to go, and this strategy, there's no strategy to them really, which is what grinds my gears, because I love to see how the different strategies can play in the race. And for example, today, that was one of the main things that kept the race exciting, was the fact that all these drivers were on different overcut, undercut strategies. But the sprint race is too short for any meaningful strategy or pit stops, etc. There's going to be safety cars lap 1 that cause the rest of it just to be completely boring and stagnant. They just don't do it for me. I just thought there'd be so much more to them. And I think little things could make them more interesting. For example, all of the cars have to start on the same tyres, or you make it long enough to warrant a second pit stop. There just has to be something, because they don't contribute anything more to a weekend. They don't add an extra layer of excitement.
I disagree with all of you. I love them. Who has time to sit down and watch a 2-hour race on Sunday? I've been on here plenty of times and said I'm not particularly a fan. And what I've noticed recently, I've had a couple of people approach me and say they're confused. They're confused by the qualifying on the Friday, and then people saying, oh, why is Max not on pole on Sunday? Well, it's because 2 days ago we had a completely separate qualifying for the race today. It's just, as you guys said, I think we appreciate that they've tried something to make it more exciting and to try to maximize what is in essence their business and every property of it. But I just don't think that it's particularly worked. I don't, so much so I love F1. I absolutely love F1, and I think this weekend, because it was in an evening, was the first time I've actually bothered to sit down and actually watch a qualifying for it, or shootout as it's now referred to, and the race itself. And while it was quite enjoyable, it was just, I feel like I'm getting old. As when I was younger, I was very much like, why are these drivers not allowed to go?
Scott,
100%?
how old are you? Scott, how old are you?
I'm 32. I know I'm younger than you.
No. That's That's still a pretty gross old age. Don't worry about it. That's pretty grim.
What I'm saying is, when I was younger, I was very much like, why are these drivers not able to go 100% all the time? Why does it have to be strategy? Why? I didn't get it. But as I've got older and learned more about the sport, I appreciate it more. And I actually realized, yes, that strategy is part of motor racing, and it is what makes races interesting. And obviously Qatar was a bit of a failure. It was a bit boring personally from my perspective, because they did 52 qualifying laps pretty much full out, and it just didn't work. And the sprint race is kind of similar. It fizzles out very quickly, and then we're sitting there waiting for the race to finish so that we can concentrate on the next day, which is where it really matters.
Antonia.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this, Spanners. Like, as F1 fans, stuff you're saying, we're all huge F1 fans, right? Surely for a sprint weekend, we would be more excited for it because there's more racing, there's more F1, but we're not. We're not sitting here thinking, this is going to be a great weekend because look how much F1 we get.
Yeah.
It just doesn't carry the same sparkle. And it's just not working.
Does it bring joy? That's the key question. And I feel like it's too much, and every single element is diluted. So even if overall it's 10% better, each individual element is only 80%. So that does not spark joy for me. All right, good. Okay, last subject before the awards, and it's Ferrari. And talking about Ferrari makes me so sad. I've developed a fantastic tactic for dealing with that, which is that I put all my panel on screen and I say, Matt, you're in charge of talking Ferrari. I will see you in 4 minutes.
Oh, wow. What a surprise. Here we go. Yeah, Ferrari. went from pole to not pole. Congratulations on that winning strategy. I don't know. From my point of view, it was never going to be their day for the previously mentioned ride height reasons. I feel like they actually had a lot of positives in terms of their one lap pace here. But this was not the track to see if they're really on top of it or not. Antonia.
This feels like pass the parcel, except with like a really horrible, nasty parcel that no one really wants to touch.
Fruitcake. Yeah, you just every holiday you mail your fruitcake to the person who sent it to you, and it just never gets consumed.
I can't keep having the same conversation. I mean, you know, Leclerc on the radio saying, "Oh, Plan C sucks. Why am I on Plan C?" Well, because if you get any, I'm so bored of hearing all of these letters from the alphabet that aren't near the front of it. You know, why are we on Plan H on lap 6? Like, I'm so sick of it. The strategy, yeah, it wasn't there. And it was never going to be a circuit that suited them. Of course, we didn't know that. They're not on top form at the moment, especially at a circuit like this. But from pole position, all to slip down to P6 for Leclerc is just horrendous. And for neither of the drivers to be on the podium, I think was so poor from Ferrari today and so not acceptable for the caliber of team that they are. But I've said it before. We've all said it before. So I would hate to bore our listeners because I can't keep coming up with synonyms for mediocre.
So clearly, Scott, putting signs on the winning strategy and ahead of Leclerc shows that there's been a shift of power at Ferrari.
Yeah, that was an odd one. I don't understand how the team with the highest degradation on their tyres decides to do the one strategy that requires the best tyre management. Try and make that make sense, people. Ferrari strategy 101. Yeah, I mean, if I'm Leclerc, I'm a very angry man. And he said, why have I had to let signs through? I mean, it was a comedy show all weekend, to be honest. Even I don't like to call out individual people, but I've made comments before or brought up Charles Leclerc's engineer in particular. And he nearly gave Charles Leclerc a heart attack in qualifying. I don't know if anyone saw this on Friday, where he went lap time deleted, and Leclerc was like, "What were you telling me?" He's like, Verstappen lap time deleted, and he's like, "Tell me the name first, Xavi." And it was just comedy gold. But that's just kind of highlights what Ferrari have kind of been going through these last few years, and today just was the latest episode.
That's the thing. There's an ongoing joke online about Xavi, his race engineer, being his biggest hater and his biggest downfall.
Oh my God.
And
really?
But I see where they're coming from. They don't seem like they're on the same team 90% of the time. Charles sat there in a strop in the car because he's not happy with the communication. And surely that's one of the most basic things. You talk to your driver in a clear, confident, concise way, execute your decisions with the confidence that you've calculated them correctly and you know why you're doing what you're doing. Not plan D or plan C, or do you want to stay on the one that's really not working for you, or should we switch you to a different one that probably also won't work for you? We have no idea. We've just pressed a random letter generator and said, go for that one. How Leclerc doesn't trust his own engineer, the person who is meant to be his closest confidant on the radio. Come on.
Okay. Admittedly, it's almost as easy as taking candy from a baby to criticize Ferrari.
Okay, do it. No, I agree. Go for it. Do it. Take that candy and you eat that candy.
I refuse. I'm giving that candy to the baby and I'm going to watch it choke. No, not really. No. I would save its life first.
Steve, can we get an edit on that?
Yeah, we're going to need an edit. Sorry, that was comedy that went very wrong. I want to bring up what I think is the silver lining for Ferrari this weekend. And that's qualifying and Charles Leclerc sensibly being conservative and not getting his lap time deleted, the lap time that ultimately gave him pole position. And so my question is, I have been a longtime critic of Leclerc, not because he's not a good driver, not because he's not fast, but because when push comes to shove, he always has this idea that he can go slightly faster than the car is actually capable of. And is this a new leaf for him? Are we finally seeing the maturity we've been waiting from Leclerc?
I agree. I think one positive that I think Ferrari can take away from this weekend is Charles's performance. Ignore today. We always knew he was probably going to go back down the grids, not as obviously he had a lot of assistance from the strategy team today, but he put in a great lap or great performance on Friday. He did pretty well on the Saturday as well. Was he P2? I think it was P2 on the sprint shootout. So much F1 over the weekend.
Yeah.
But after a couple of poor performances recently, with Sainz being the man of the hour, winning Singapore and putting in those front-facing performances, Charles was kind of back at it again this weekend. It's just a shame that it's ended on a sour note with the strategy call.
Are we hearing ourselves right now?
Yeah.
Aside from the race, he had a great weekend. You mean the main component of the weekend?
It weren't his fault. It wasn't his fault though, was it? Let's be honest. It's the team.
I would love
then
to
going
do.
Matt's point then.
Yeah.
Well done. He did really well not to get track limits in quali, so he kept his pole lap.
This is how
Didn't
low
break
the
the
bar.
rules. What are we saying? Congratulations, Charles. You didn't break the rules in quali, and you had a really great weekend, other than the main part of the weekend.
This is how low the bar is for Ferrari.
That's
at the
what
moment,
I'm saying, and I'm agreeing. Like, but are we having to go to these lengths to find the smallest thing to compliment?
Yes.
It's like being in school and the person who gets 0 out of 10 in every test gets 1 out of 10. They get an award. It's like, what do you mean? We're rewarding mediocrity in the finest sense, and it is so time that we stopped handing drivers, and generally speaking, handing bare minimums and going, oh, you did so good. They did not. They did horribly.
I have never been more grateful that this is a remotely recorded podcast. Otherwise, we would all be in physical danger. Matt.
Everything you said about the team and the performance in the race is true. But I'm still going to come back to, I have been waiting years to see Charles Leclerc not drive into a wall, break his transmission, crash on the first lap
Baku,
when
Monaco.
he was the fastest car. I have said it over and over and over again. His weakness is he feels like he has to drive 110%, and he needs to learn how to drive 99% and still feel like he's driving 110%. And the sense I get from his qualifying performance this weekend is that maybe he has personally turned that corner. And I would classify that as a big thing, regardless of how Ferrari, the team, or he himself finished in the race. We won't know until we see it again. But it's the most positive sign I've seen from him since we've been making this complaint, which has been pretty much forever?
Yeah, I will just say after my rant there, I'm a big Charles Leclerc fan. Love Ferrari.
Okay.
Too late.
Yeah.
You're never going back there again.
I think they're fab. No, it's going back to what we've always said, which is you're hardest on the people that you want to do well,
agree.
And I'm sat here and I'd love to root for Ferrari because they've got a great lineup and they could be doing so much better than they are, which is just why it's frustrating.
Yeah, welcome to the land of every Ferrari fan. Let's move on to the podium. All right, that was one of my favourite race weekends of the year. And I suppose it's a fairly low bar when you come to overall competitiveness to say, well, we saw a genuine battle up front. Even at Singapore, we saw a different winner to Max Verstappen. But what we didn't get to see was Max Verstappen mixing it with this grid. And I truly believe that with Red Bull, we are seeing one of the best drivers with one of the best cars in one of the best teams fighting in Formula One. And it would be a better legacy for that best driver and that best car and that best team to be fighting against quote unquote worthy opposition. And today we just got a glimpse of what it might be like if in this regulation set in 2024, McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari turn up with something competitive to fight Red Bull. I wouldn't get my hopes up too much because Red Bull have all but abandoned their 2023 aspirations. It's a bumpy track that perhaps Red Bull are not quite got their grips to. Same thing we saw in Singapore. If I'm struggling with my words, it's because it is 1:15 a.m. But all I'm saying is that we might be seeing a little bit of a false dawn. But if we just dream hard enough, if we pray and sacrifice something to the F1 gods, maybe they will reward us with a competitive 2024. And maybe if we could suggest one thing to sacrifice to the F1 gods, I would say Alpine. No?
Is that your mic drop? Is that just, really? I want rid of Alpine and just
Really? With all the new investment and all the sports people? Those are the people you'd get rid of?
I thought
Not
I
the
said
people
that.
who had to start in the pit lane because they don't even know which way up is?
I thought I said that in my head, but it came out loud apparently. So yeah, Alpine, everyone's 10th favourite team. But yes, we haven't mentioned Aston Martin at all, who had to do, who got things so wrong, they had to start from the pit lane. But this is a good opportunity to mention those things in our awards segment. So the first thing we do is give out a good thing award. It's the thing of the weekend! Okay, I'm definitely going to get told off for that because that was quite loud and everyone else in this house has been asleep for about 4 hours. So, thing of the weekend, let's go to Antonia Rankin. Antonia, what was the thing or person or concept or time or just ethereal feeling of the weekend?
Gosh, that's very deep for 1 a.m.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually give mine to Max Verstappen for
Okay, good.
2 reasons. The first is that he actually held his own under pressure, which he hasn't really been all year. So, good for him. He's a bit out of practice in that aspect. And to that note, also, he recognised the person behind him because he hasn't seen Lewis in his mirrors for a while.
Yes, he hasn't had to use his mirrors for a while.
Yeah, props to him for looking behind him and going, oh, there's Lewis Hamilton. So yeah, thing of the weekend. Good job, Max.
Nice. Stuffey. Scottifer. What was your thing of the weekend?
My thing of the weekend kind of brings us on to my second conspiracy theory of the evening, is the green team of Aston Martin, and I'm giving it to Alonso because after a shocking Friday and Saturday for him and the team in general, while they did take the opportunity to break Parc Ferme and change some setup options and bolt all of the brand new upgrades onto Baby Stroll's car, Alonso was still ahead of him, and starting from the pit lane was around 9th or 8th, I think it was, until, and you can see the air quotes here, figuratively, if you're listening on one of the many podcasting platforms, had to retire due to a floor issue. Oh, how convenient. And the conspiracy theory is, and is it really a conspiracy theory if your dad is a billionaire that owns the team? Alonso's car is being pegged back in performance to make Lance Stroll look better because of that retirement, Lance Stroll finished in the points after a couple of weeks of getting absolutely tanked in the media, rightfully so. Alonso now the gap there doesn't look as big, does it? And he now gets a bit of friendly PR.
Okay, hang on. Here we go. Scott, no.
Yes.
Lance Stroll has shown repeatedly through crashing into the wall at Singapore, amongst other things, that proved how committed he was. Yeah. His dedication to crashing has shown how amazing he was. And as his dad said, he has been unlucky. And that's the only reason. He's been super unlucky. That's the only reason there's been a gap. And just for you to suggest that huge PR push now coincides with a gap between him and his 2-time world champion teammate closes, how dare you? How dare you, Scott?
I know. And my last bad thing of the weekend, guys.
Hang on. If we're moving on, though, Antonia, I think you had a related thing.
Well, no, it was, can I announce it, being the dedicated Mercedes fan here today?
Okay.
It's just been confirmed that Lewis Hamilton has been disqualified from the United States.
Are you joking? Are you actually joking?
It's come from the one and only Chris Medland. If it doesn't come from him, it's not true, and it has come from Chris.
Wow.
Why does it have to be my part of this segment as well in all the Mercedes merch?
I mean, the people listening back wouldn't have known that it happened exactly at that point, so you could have finished the Aston Martin point. However,
we did this Yes.
It just it keeps on coming. Because Luke Smith is reporting that Charles Leclerc has also been disqualified. And you know what that means? Logan Sargent has scored a point.
Okay, well done to Logan Sargent for scoring. That's an achievement, and it's come off the back of a lot of criticism. But if you want to talk about a default point, you can talk about a Grand Prix where 4 cars started in the pit lane, 2 cars retired immediately, and then 2 cars were disqualified. Forgive me for not doing jumping jacks, Antonia.
Can I just say, how many times now has Sainz got a podium from a race after not actually being on the podium?
Wow. Yeah, he's inherited.
Can that be my bad thing? Can that be
Sainz has got a podium? My goodness.
Oh, geez, it's all changed.
Because how many times has this man been posthumously or post-racistly?
No, posthumously is like death. I don't think we can...
after the death of the race, how many times has he been put onto the podium? This poor man hasn't had any champagne.
Can I just add to this as well? There were 4 cars post-race that the FIA randomly test for the planks after a race. So there's a few cars out there that could have possibly also have breached this rule who are now benefiting from this. It just so happens to be that the 2 of the 4 randomly tested cars were Charles and Lewis.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Charles been disqualified.
Yeah, he's gone. So I'm getting such Brazil vibes here. Brazil in 2021 where they had the little roller that they pushed through the DRS flap, and it's like, oh, it's not quite going through. Let's get 18 people behind it to shove it through. Boom. Okay, yeah, he's disqualified. Oh, it just happens to be Lewis, does it? It just happens to be Lewis, the first plank infringement, and you're getting my raw Hamfosi here in real time. What other disqualifications have we had for the plank? All that suspicion.
They're going to fine him £1 million now.
All the suspicion.
I'm going to have to pour cold water on that, Spanners. I'm going to have to turn the heads here. I mean,
that's fair.
Come on, this is randomly tested.
Hang on, of all the controversy with planks and all the technical directives and all the stuff around the areas of the measuring area disappearing around the Red Bull, the technical directive being fired at that, it's Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton specifically gets his podium taken away for a plank violation. Is this happening? Is this really happening?
And it's happening live.
It's happening live. So that's my raw reaction to it, Matt. I don't apologize for it.
I just want to know, if I was the FIA and 2 people failed that inspection, I'd be going back and look at everybody's plank at this point. And I'm curious to see if they do that, because I mean, admit it, if you're a scrutineer and you have randomly chosen the following people and 2 of them fail, you're thinking maybe there's a larger issue here and the whole grid needs to be looked at.
All right.
So just not only has Charles Leclerc been finished 6th, then been disqualified, to rub it in, his own teammate, he had to let by, has now secured a podium.
Amazing. That's absolutely...
Clearly, Sainz is now the #1 driver at Ferrari.
Look, this is off the back as well of, yes, we know we find Lewis Hamilton a lot for crossing the track, and that's normally the end of it. But we're also going to super secret investigate him at COTA because he's a role model. Off the back of that, and off the back of we're now increasing the maximum we can find people, and then now we get here, there's been so much stuff around the plank, and it just happens. It just happens to be Lewis Hamilton, not from 6th, but from that 2nd place. All right, so this podcaster is calling shenanigans. I am deeply unhappy.
Is that your bad thing in the weekend?
Hang on, wait 2 seconds.
Oh no, you missed the apex.
Right, I'm going to take a moment to calm down and ask Matt. Matt, what was your thing of the weekend?
Well, you mean aside from doing our podcast so late? You know what? I'm just gonna go there. My thing of the weekend was having the chance to watch Hamilton chasing down Verstappen and having that be in the realm of possibility that he would catch him.
Okay, fair enough.
It's nice to see a race at the end where you think that could happen. The strategies, everything played into it. At the end of the day, it's 2 of the best drivers on the planet chasing each other down, and it was just fantastic to watch.
Great.
Even if it all didn't mean anything at the end.
My thing of the weekend is, no, you shut up. I'm in a bad mood now.
You missed
Boo!
the apex.
Okay, so the Missed Apex Award goes to me, it goes to Lewis Hamilton for failing magically somehow to have his plank comply with some rule or other. Okay, Antonia, what missed the apex for you? It can be me if you want.
I have so many words normally, and none of them are here right now. How do you fail that technical regulation? It's so big.
Well, it could be Mercedes then. It could be Mercedes for failing that technical regulation. So yeah.
Yeah, and it is though, because stuff like this is so textbook. You just don't run your car to the ground that low, especially Mercedes and Ferrari, who were the two teams that arguably struggled the most with porpoising. They know full well about ride height and all of the regulations that came along with it, given how much stress was put on it last year. How have they let this happen? I mean, it's nuts. And I mean, fair enough. It's great. It's given us a fantastic result, Interesting for Perez as well, a bit of a lifesaver for him in terms of closing up that points gap.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But shocking. I'm a bit shocked.
And that has serious financial implications as well, doesn't it? In the Constructors' Championship. Scott, do one of your conspiracies and then I can say that you're wrong. Can you do this conspiracy?
Another rumor is that Perez, a different Perez rumor now, is that if he doesn't secure P2 in the championship, he will not retain his seat for the end of the year. That's the rumor going around the paddock, apparently.
Okay, Scott, who missed the apex for you?
Haas in general.
Yeah,
because there
was their big upgrade,
I saw
hashtag
Haasball. They've got a brand new big update. Basically, everything's brand new, and they just, where were they? I like to quote Gunther Steiner. Gunther Steiner has been quoted a few times recently regarding an 11th team that it's quality over quantity, and we don't want teams who can't bring anything to the grid. Well, I would say at this moment in time, or for quite some period of time now, Haas have not brought any value to this grid. So, yes, they're my missed apex.
The way you said that made me think you were about to say, like, to quote John Keats. But no, you went Gunther Steiner.
Yeah, I can't remember what happened last week, but did you not just earlier in the show talk about the amazing racing between Magnussen and Tsunoda? I mean, Haas has clearly brought at least two halfway decent drivers to this fight. For
17th place. Was it
yeah,
for?
But still,
it wasn't even shown on TV. I had to go through the depths of Twitter to find it.
Fine. Be that way.
Who hasn't done a missed apex award? I think it's you, Matt.
Yeah, no, because obviously, if we're going to look at who missed the apex, the people who started in the pit lane are clearly the ones to look at. And while you can ding Haas, who waited all season to bring their giant update to a session that only had one practice before you had to lock everything in, I am going to point my finger at Aston Martin, which is so sadly lost that they put an old floor on Fernando Alonso's car, a new floor on Lance Stroll's car, because they just don't know what's going on. And then after they did that, the floor failed on Alonso's car and they had to retire him. So I hope they got some usable data out of that, because they were fun when they were like looking like they might win a thing. But geez, I mean, holy Williams 2019, guys. So let's just cover the whole car in FlowViz and put on like the stuff from 2014 and see what happens.
All right.
That's like really kind of where I feel they are.
And my missed apex award goes to me, and I'm blaming it being 1:30, and my normal veil of neutrality. I feel like it's slightly slipped, like my mask of neutrality just slightly fell off, Matt. How do you think I did? I think I might have given my personal biases away a tiny bit.
I'm pretty sure given the hour.
Yeah.
You probably got away with it.
And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a midweek show of some sort coming up. But please, thank you very much for joining us this late at night or for downloading us. And please, if you've got a second, tell your friends that Missed Apex Podcast is a pretty good place to catch up with stuff post-race. But most importantly, go and follow my panel. All the links will be in the show notes below. But follow future TV and international social media sensation Antonia J. Rankin. I promise you will be able to say, oh, I was following and listening to Antonia years ago because she is a future megastar. Scott's too old to make anything like meaningful of his life, but his stream is pretty good. Scott, don't give me that look. I'm telling
Love
people,
you too, Spanners.
I'm
Love
telling
you too.
people to follow you. I'm also way past, boiling
A
point.
weird way of doing it.
Okay. Follow me.
Anyway.
I'm the best one. At Spanners Ready, at Missed Apex F1 on Twitter. Wherever we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. It's late.